Welcome and good morning to this seminar from the Norwegian Polytechnic Society. This is done with the support of the Norwegian Foundation Fritt Ord. We have a good panel for you this morning. We have Herculano Coroado from Luanda with us on video link. We have Aslak Orre at the Michelsens Institutt in Bergen, and we have Vegard Bye here in Oslo. We will start with a short introduction. Angola is the second biggest oil producer south of the Sahara. It has a long and quite bloody history. Since its independence, most of its independent years have been spent in a civil war that ended in 2002. To just give us a short view of the view from Luanda, I suggest we start with Herculano. If you could just tell us a little bit how the world looks from Luanda and why. Can you hear us, Herculano? Can you hear us now, Herculano?
I think also Aslak lost our sound.
Here.
If you can hear us, Herculano, could you just give us a short introduction to the view of the world from Luanda?
Yes, indeed, and thank you very much. As you just mentioned, Angola is an African country, a country located in southern Africa. Angola has a vast mineral and petroleum reserves, and its economy is among the fastest growing in the world just for the last, I would say, 19 years, especially since the end of the Civil War. However, economic growth is highly uneven in this country, with most of the nation's wealth concentrated in a disproportionately small sector of the population. The standard of living remains low for most Angolans. Life expectancy is among the lowest in the world, while infant mortality is among the highest. Since 2017, the government of President João Lourenço has made fighting corruption its flagship program, so much so that many individuals of the previous government, led by former President José Eduardo dos Santos, are either locked up or have court hearings lined up. While this is something unseen in the previous government, skeptics, however, see the fight on corruption as a selective campaign just to control the political framework of the country, especially inside its own political party, which is the ruling party in Angola, NPD. As I mentioned, Angola has diamonds, oil, gold, copper, and rich wildlife, dramatically depleted during the Civil War, forests, and so on. Since independence, oil and diamonds have been the most important economic resource of this country. Smallholders and plantation agriculture dramatically dropped in the Angolan Civil War, but began to recover after 2002. Angola's economy has, in recent years, moved on from the disarray caused by the quarter century of Angolan Civil War, as I mentioned before, to become the fastest growing economy in Africa, one of the fastest growing economy in the world, I would say 11 years ago, with an average GDP growth of 20% between 2005 and 2007. In the period of 2001-2010, Angola had the world's highest annual average GDP growth at 11.1%. China actually is Angola's biggest trade partner and export destination, as well as the fourth largest source of imports. Bilateral trade reached about $27.67 billion in 2011, up to 11.5 year on year. China imports mainly, I would say, crude oil and diamonds, increased about 9.1% to $24.89 billion, while China exports to Angola, including mechanical and electrical products, machinery parts, and construction materials, surged 38.8%. And the loans agreements were to limit the influence of IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, that is now in Angola to help fix the economy facing a downturn. As you know, Angola's 3 years extended arrangement program with IMF was approved by the executive board of directors of IMF on 7th of December of 2018, and in an amount of 3.7 billion at the time of the approval. It aims to restore external and physical and fiscal sustainability, improve governance, and diversify the economy to promote sustainable private sector-led economy and to provide confidence in the economy of this country, especially to investors coming from abroad. Also, all these developments, one should say that the country's economy has grown significantly since Angola achieved political stability in 2002, mainly due to the faster rise in earnings in the oil sector. Angola faces huge social and economic problems. These are in part a result of the almost continual armed conflicts which has begun in 1961. Although the highest level of destruction and social economic damage took place after the 1975 independence during the long years of civil war. However, high poverty rates and blatant social inequality chiefly stems from the persistent authoritarianism, neo-patrimonial practice at all levels of the political, administrative, military, and economic structure, and a pervasive corruption in the country as well. The main beneficiaries of the economic growth of Angola in the last, I would say, 20 years will be the political, administrative, economical, and military powers holders who have accumulated and continue to accumulate even now enormous wealth in the country. But the multi-faced nature of the COVID that the country is facing, challenge that the country is facing, has made the economy be obviously at this point in an economic downturn, because it has completely stopped the economy at the beginning of last year. However, the government has put in place a plan to resume the economic activity in the country, which might lead to the economic growth again. The multi-faced nature of the COVID-19 shock continues to be a negative impact in Angola's economy and the population. However, oil production and prices remain weak, and the health and social impacts of the pandemic continue to be felt in the country all over the place, even here in Luanda, where you have a more healthy sort of economic activity. The authorities of Angola have maintained a robust policy response in the face of this challenge and remain resolutely committed to the program. The authorities achieved a prudent fiscal adjustment in 2020, last year, that includes a non-oil revenue gains and restraints in non-essential expenditure while preserving essential spending on health and social safety nets. The passage of the 2021 budget for this year, it happened last December, consolidates these gains The authorities have also allowed the exchange rates to act as a shock absorber and have begun to implement a gradual shift towards monetary tightening to address the rising price pressure right now in the market. One also should mention the set of opportunities that we are seeing in the market, because the government has a plan to diversify the economy and to increase the domestic production of goods and services in order to diversify the economy. And the agriculture sector has been the main area where the government is driving to the investments. Agriculture, as you might see, and the forestry is an area of potential opportunity for the country right now. The African Economic Outlook Organization states that Angola requires about 4.5 million tons a year of grain, but grows only about 55% of the maize it needs, 20% of the rice, and just 5% of its required wheat. In addition, the World Bank estimates that less than 3% of Angolans' abundant fertile land that we have across the country is cultivated, and the economic potential of the forestry sector remains largely unexplored. Before the independence, just to mention these aspects, in 1995 or 1975, Angola has almost a bread basket to southern Africa, and a major export of bananas, for instance, coffee, and sisal. But 3 decades of civil war destroyed fertile countryside and left it littered with the landmines, drove millions of people into the cities where they are confined right now. And the government is trying to create policies to attract these people to go back to the countryside so that they can help develop the rural areas economy by investing in agricultural sector. The country now depends on expensive goods imports, just for you to see, mainly from South Africa and Portugal, while more than 90% of the farming is done at the family and subsistence level. Thousands of Angolan small-scale farmers are trapped in poverty, and poverty is the main issue in the country that might just down the road, even this year, increase the level of dissatisfaction of the people and perhaps, I would say, social unrest.
Thank you, Herculano. I would also like to introduce Aslak Orre at the Michelsens Institutt in Bergen. Aslak, we now had an introduction to Angolan politics and economy. Could you just tell us a little bit about the Angolan relationship with the rest of the world, for instance, Norway?
Yeah, I can do that. I'd plan to show you a few pictures from Angola, so maybe I can just start with that, and along the way tell you about Angola's relationship with the rest of the world. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So let me see if I can turn on the PowerPoint here. Can you see that now?
No.
No.
No. The technicians, is there any chance of showing things on the screen? Okay. Well, Maren, is there any chance of showing things on the screen?
I suggest you start talking and then we'll see.
Okay. Well, the thing is that I would like to thank Herculano for a very, very good introduction to many topics in Angola. I have planned to show you some pictures from illustrating his points, and also some graphs showing major developmental trends, which can be illustrative also as showing how Angola relates to the exterior world. So again, let me just emphasize that since independence, Angola has sort of gone through two main periods, and the first one is, of course, the long period of wars, where Angola's relations with the exteriors were, determined by that war and the outside interests in influencing the outcome of the war. That took place during the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, although the war is not only to be explained by external affairs, of course. Now, after the second period is, of course, what happened after the war, which was simultaneously the period of peace and an oil boom, where Angola was rebuilding after the war with help of the extraordinary high income from the oil industry. So it's very hard not to emphasize again and again how important oil and the astronomical oil income has been to understand Angola. So, if you wind back to 2002, when the war between the MPLA government and the UNITA guerrilla movement ended, then that's when also the start of the oil boom takes place. The oil price, international oil price, goes up from about from the low point of $10 per barrel to some years later over $100 per barrel. And at the same time, the oil production in Angola increases very rapidly. And that gives a lot of financial space and room for the Angolan regime. So one of the trends that comes in, that's also been asked by the Polytechnic Association, is what is this thing about China? So China comes in about 2003-04, really only from then on, and finds a partnership with the Angolan elite, where it realizes that the Chinese can raise quick cash based on the oil as collateral, and can rapidly finance the infrastructure projects that the Angolan elite decides will be key for the reconstruction of the country. So by 2006, 7, 8, then an enormous program of infrastructure development starts, and it's all, to a large extent, eventually financed by petroleum, but it's directly financed by Chinese loans, where Angola promises to pay it back with future oil income. Now, that construction process also eventually, it brings railways, airports, thousands of kilometers of roads, and other things like hospitals and schools and skyscrapers in the city center of Luanda. But of course, all this building activity is also at the heart of these are creating the opportunities for the Angolan elite of enriching themselves, skimming all the time skimming the infrastructure project, which takes place of financed by the state and the oil eventually. Now, so this goes on until about 2014, when there's a sudden change in fortune, when the oil price suddenly drops to less than half, and oil production really stops and starts going down. I think Herculano also mentioned that oil production since 2014 has dropped by about 40%. So altogether, this creates a real fiscal crisis, which is spreading to become a real economic downturn in Angola. So on top of the lower income, then Angola also has to pay back its debt to China and other countries. Meaning Angola now spends more than half of its national budget to service its enormous debt. And the debt now amounts to more than 100% of its GDP. So this is a really serious situation and a change of fortune just in the last 5 years. The economy of Angola is shrinking every year now, and that started way before the COVID pandemic. So, so this is the backdrop, the enormous roller coaster of the Angolan situation, where it was a key battleground during the Cold War, and then peace, then the oil boom, and then the bust that is now crippling the economy. Okay, so let me then just say that the current regime so to answer your question, the relationship with the exterior world, this thing about China has been important, but you could say that as long as the current regime stays in power in Luanda, it is likely to continue as it has always done, which is to try to balance between big powers and squeeze favors from them all, and bartering its main assets, which is regional influence and oil. But the problem is that nowadays these currencies are much less worth than they used to be. But in the end, China is less worth to Angola now. So in a way, the relationship with China can be perhaps put down to the following, where it was the relationship with the Chinese was a real resource for the Angolan elite's billionaire project. It financed it during the oil boom. Now China is mostly a creditor and therefore also a nuisance, perhaps even more than a resource to the regime. So this will shape the relationship with China. And I suspect then that in relating to the exterior world, then Angola, the current regime will continue to rely on its relationship with the Atlantic world, Europe, North America, Brazil, as it has always done anyway. It has more cultural and economic trade relations really with the Atlantic world than with East Asia and China. It also has its linguistic and cultural roots much more connected to the Atlantic world than to the East. So if you ask me in sum, where is Angola to be turning? I expect it to be turning more towards the Atlantic world than towards the East and to China, in conclusion.
Thank you, Aslak. I'm also joined here today by Vegard Bye from SCAM team. Vegard used to live in Luanda, working for the UN Office of Human Rights from 2004 to 2008. So could you just comment on how the relationship between Luanda and the international world, and then also both UN and like you said, China and other countries have changed over the past?
Well, I think that when there was a change of guards in Luanda in 2017, when President Dos Santos finally gave up his power, the expectation was that everything would continue the same. Evidently, Lourenço was the hand-picked candidate of Dos Santos, Everybody expected him to continue, so to say, in the same shoes. Very fast, however, it became evident that Lourenço had his own plans. The question is, how much could he change? How much was he willing to change? Dos Santos was quite fast taken out of all power positions. Lourenço has been making a lot of changes in terms of those in power. The question is, has this really led to significant change from the extremely autocratic system that Dos Santos was dominating? Has there been any sign of opening up, so to say, the presidential absolutism that Dos Santos practiced to a more, some would say, negotiated hegemony? Well, we could come back to those issues. How much has changed in terms of the international relations? That was a question. I would claim that the combination of the deep economic crisis, the more complicated relationship to China, where there is now some kind of a payback time to the Chinese debt, has opened up for a more interest from Angola's side to communicate and to have a negotiation situation with other Western powers, like the EU, like the US. I'm presently also working with the evaluation of the EU's cooperation with Angola for the last 12 years. And if you speak to EU actors, they would say that there is a complete change in the relationship. The new government in Angola is much more interested to negotiate, to have a communication, to look for European investments. Before, Dos Santos didn't even want to listen to these kind of actors. When we were working in the UN system in Angola, we were asking ourselves, what the hell are we doing here? There was no interest from the government to have any dialogue. Now that this has changed, I think that we can discuss how much has Lourenço changed real power structures. I think that there is a change in the sense that there are now more actors. The parallel structure of power, where the president system had a complete control, where ministries had no real relevance, where power was concentrated in the oil companies on Angola and in the presidential palace, is now to a certain extent changing. Only 2 days ago, Lourenço also gave an important speech saying he had the intention to make a change in the constitution that would make for a more open relationship with the National Assembly. That is, to open up for more say from the opposition, the political opposition. It remains to be seen if this is going to happen. The opposition was very happy with these declarations. They are expecting that there will be some important concessions to the parliament and to the opposition parties. It remains to be seen what is happening. We can also say that civil society has no real say in Angola, but there is a change in the sense that the present president, I think, is listening more to civil society and to even economic actors outside of the state system. But still, this is very much to be seen. One important thing that we should also be looking at is there any tendency to implement the plans of local elections, because there have been no local elections in Angola so far. The plan to establish what is called autarquias, the more decentralized municipal authority, that has been signaled for many years. The intention was to have local elections for the first time in 2020. It has been postponed. The pandemic may have been used as an excuse to postpone this. But there are a lot of plans now being discussed for change of political relations in Angola, both internally and in relation to the foreign world, or to the rest of the world. We will see if the economic crisis still will oblige Lourenço to make more concessions. I think that is very much the decisive element here. How much space does he have to continue the absolute power that was the case under Dos Santos, to what extent will he be obliged to give concessions both to other powers internally and to the rest of the world?
Thank you. Herculano, I'll give the question back to you. Has there been a real change with the change of a president in Luanda? We can't hear you.
Connect to the song. How about now? How about now?
Yes, we can hear you.
How about now? Very good. Yes, there are changes in the country, whether it is in the political framework or in the economic spectrum of the society. In the political framework, of course, we have an elected new government led now by President João Lourenço, who, after the elections, had the mission to restore trust in the government by setting up which we call a major fighting against corruption in the country. In order to be successful with that aspect, it needs to have public support from the people and the support from the institutions, including its own political party, which is the ruling party, called MPLA. So it should be more flexible. At the same time, it's supposed to set the example with regard to transparency in the government, better governance and management, also sharing information and ideas, including with the civil society. I think that this is very relevant. If it cannot reach that stage, this particular stage, in order to pursue its goals, of course, the achievement, the results might be shortcoming. He knows about that. That is why he is more flexible, especially in the relation with the young people in the country. We have seen just last year, the president met the youth in the country to discuss aspects to do with employment and the economic issues and social inclusion. I think that shows that the president is sensitive to the needs of the country to improve the lines of public debate about the issues the country will be faced right now. But on the economic framework, of course, we have a major impact in the economy coming from the global COVID-19 pandemic. And as a reaction, the government had to shut down almost the entire economy with a state of emergency that ended up months ago. And after that, the government has installed in the country what the government called and the president called a state of calamity. With an open economy, now business can be out there, and investors can come from abroad to invest. However, the impact of the pandemic is still here everywhere, and it will take some more time and some more political measures in order for the situation to be normalized or restored. The changes in the economic framework has to do more than with the pandemic side effects. Also, the economic downturn that was mentioned here started in about 2014. So the country has been seeing the contraction in its own economy, and the government is expecting this year can reach to a point of break-even for the next year to start growing the economy again. But one should say next year is the election year. So we might have next year the local elections, the legislative elections, as well as the presidential elections. It's natural that the government will spend more next year in order to please the people and to get re-elected.
Thank you. We will be opening up for questions in about 5 minutes. So those of you that are watching, you can just send in our questions now. But first, I'll ask Aslak again. Do we see a real change in Luanda, or do we not?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question and a much debated question in Luanda, and I think that's the main topic occupying, no, not the main, but a topic occupying a lot of discussions in cafes and bars in Angola. Whether they change with the new president are sort of real changes, or whether they are just changes at the level of rhetoric and sort of rhetorical changes in order to, or cosmetic changes in order to maintain the essence of the system. So I think there are two ways of looking at that. Two important backgrounds to understand the current discussion of change. One is that I don't completely agree with Vegard when he says that there is an entirely new spirit in the government now of Dos Santos, of João Lourenço. It's also true that during several points of Dos Santos' reign, there were a lot of new signals that they were going to take serious the fight against corruption, and that they were much dedicated to transparency in public finances, and that they were dedicated to implement reforms in the oil sector so that you could get more transparency introduced into the system. This talk is not entirely new under Lourenço. It also took place, and I've seen that on many occasions since I first came to Angola in 2002, that this discussion is not actually new. Also during, for instance, right after the financial crisis of the world in 2008, there were a lot of signals under Dos Santos' administration that change is coming. We really have to do things differently and be much more serious about spending public resources well, and we need to combat corruption, all of that. But in the end, when the oil prices went up again, then it was as they had forgotten all, all the talk really didn't materialize into fundamental change. So that's one background. The other background is also looking at who is João Lourenço. When he came to power in 2017, he had just been the Minister of Defense under Dos Santos' last government. Then he said, in one interview at least, that he wanted to be the Deng Xiaoping of Angola. Deng Xiaoping, for those who don't know who he was the Chinese premier who really reformed the Chinese economy, but maintained the essence of the Communist Party's one-party system. So, whereas he was liberalizing the economy. So that's who João Lourenço said he was going to do. João Lourenço is also a man of the system. He's you can use the word apparatchik. He's been in the MPLA's leadership since the 80s. He's been a governor and he's been minister many times, and he's been in the parliament. He's been in the party organs, leading politician there in the Politburo and so on. So he's a man of the system just as much as any other leader from the MPLA. So the question then, is he Gorbachev, the guy that jumps off the system and tries to reform it from the top down, which, of course, for Gorbachev eventually failed. I think that, in a way, it's, if you're pulling a parallel, he's more like Putin, in a way. His whole career comes from the party, comes from the system, comes from a deep understanding and knowledge and power over the security system, the security apparatus. And that is one key aspect to his power, his ability to control the security apparatus of the country, meaning the military, the police, and the secret services. So I think that he has that security apparatus foot, and much more, and the question is whether he would lean on that in the future rather than his civilian following. One way of thinking about it is that if the economy gets so bad that he has much less room for maneuver to dish out patronage and extend his client base, then he will, or he might lean on the security apparatus to maintain himself in power, and that will or could look very authoritarian. So we will not see this for sure yet, I guess.
Thank you. Vegard, you have met João Lourenço several times when you were working in Luanda. What's your impression of the new president?
Well, I wouldn't say I know him personally, but I have met him several times when he was the vice president of parliament. That was, of course, in a period where he had very little power, because he was actually sidelined by Dos Santos. So he was put in a symbolic position before then came back, as Aslak said, as Minister of Defense. And it was from that position that he was selected to be the new president. My impression is that he is a more honest man than many of the people around Dos Santos. I think he has been surrounded by people that definitely are part of the power structure of the MPLA, but perhaps people that were sidelined by Dos Santos. So some of the people now being in power positions in his government were people that were completely turned down by Dos Santos. One important thing, I think, is his wife, Ana Diaz Lourenço. She was Angola's representative in the World Bank Council of Presidents, Executive Council. And I think that through her, she has now a very strong position in economic policies in Angola. And she knows that in order to accommodate to oil companies, to the IMF, which now has a very strong position in Angola, Angola needs to be more, at least a little bit more open and transparent than under Dos Santos. There is a discussion about, how much is changing. I think you can say that, I believe that Lourenço wants to change things, not give up power, not take the MPLA away from the dominant position, but at least to try to open up to more actors, both internationally and nationally. The question is, does he have the power to do that? And I think one of the problems here is that he may be negotiating between more actors than before, but he cannot really challenge the real power in the country. I think that is his problem. One interesting case, I think there was a very serious repression in Luanda Norte, in the province to the north and east, close to the Congolese border, in January, where something between 10 and 30 people were killed. The police commander immediately said, "This is nothing to investigate. We have done the only thing that was necessary." Whereas the Attorney General said, "We need to investigate this." He met with the civil society. He said, "We are going to make a deep investigation," which is still going on. And I think that illustrates the extent to which there are contradictions between different powers in the country. That was not the case when Dos Santos was president. I think Lourenço is obliged to negotiate more than before.
Thank you. We are getting some questions, and it actually binds into some of the questions that I have left as well. We have a question on what the opportunities are for Norwegian companies in Angola, and I would add as well, how should companies, what should they think about if they think about going to Luanda? And Herculano, could you just start on that?
You know, companies want to come to Angola to invest, they will find a pleasing government, a pleasing society. However, we still have a lot of barriers that can create obstacles for these investments to be smooth and to be fast. We still have this heavy bureaucratic burden in the country that might prevent many people from investing here. And I think the government should continue its policy in overcome these challenges and to make it easy for investors. But if they are coming into the country, eventually, as we have seen, you know, in the last, I would say, 10 years or 7 years, 6 years, people try to invest in real economy, in trade, you know, importing goods to the country and then sell it out, because there is a huge need in this market of about 31 million people in the country. There are also opportunities here in the agricultural sector because most of the land is not being used for cropping and the forestry at the same time, you know, are not being taken advantage from. I think investments can be driven to the agricultural sector as well as to the mineral and the mining industry. Angola is rich in minings, in natural resources, and eventually this is a very good sector to invest in, whether that is for diamonds, for gold, or any other, I would say, natural resources is good. But the strong and inviting environment here you might find in the agricultural sector, as one can say, because Angola can be very strong source of commodities and to be sold across the world. And I think the experience had shown that before the independence, Angola was exporting a lot of commodities, and the government is thinking that this is the time to recover that trend from the past. And they try to invite not only foreign investors to come and to join investments in this industry, but particularly private investors in the country. The government has put in place a public funding to support the growing businesses in this particular industry. I don't know what is the outcome so far, but several businesses last year have been funded under that particular program. It's likely this program to continue this year and to grow even more next year, the electoral year.
I think we lost the feed from Luanda, but Aslak, you could you also comment on this? And especially, there are some pitfalls when investing in Angola, as amongst others, our state oil company Equinor has experienced.
Yeah, so I put down a few sort of areas where Norwegian companies could possibly be interested, and then, of course, there is the oil, the whole oil business and the oil sector, which is dominated by Equinor, from the Norwegian side. And of course, there is and there will be opportunities of business in the oil industry for the next few years at least. But I think that, if there's anything that Angola really needs help with, then it is the same things that we need help with in Norway, which is not to further consolidate the oil business or dependence on oil, because that has really been the unhappy fate of Angola. It really needs a transition from the oil industry to other sorts of economic activities. Angola's oil production is falling. Angola's oil reserves are not the largest, and it's also a very difficult country to do oil business in because of all the persistent suspicions about corruptions and all the problems related with that lately has been amply illustrated with the problems that Equinor has had in Angola. So yes, the corruption issue is a pitfall, but I would say that Angola needs to do the same thing as in Norway, transit away from the oil dependency. Now, there are also possibilities in trade, of course. Historically, Norway has exported a lot of fish to Angola, in particular bacalhau or codfish. The Angolan seems to have a never-ending appetite for bacalhau from Norway, and I'm not particularly familiar with that, but I suspect that there will be opportunities in that area for more direct export and so on, which has been going through Portuguese traders for a long time. Now, with regard to possible investments in other economic activities or other productive activities, there's really no history of Norwegian companies setting up productive activities outside of the oil business in Angola. And those who would be willing to risk doing that, I would commend them, but they would have to come with a real entrepreneurial spirit and a very strong moral compass to avoid being dragged into the corruption that they would surely be tempted by. So that could make trade difficult with back to Norway again, quite difficult. Yeah.
Thank you. We got a question about renewables or investing in a green shift in Angola. Is that possible, Vegard?
Let me first say that, of course, Angola is one of the most extremely oil-dependent countries, even more than Norway. And there has been no interest shown so far for the greening of the economy. There was a very important thing happening when Angola signed up with and ratified the Paris Agreement quite recently. And the EU, at least, is very eager to use that opportunity to press for more diversification of the economy. Diversification of the economy has always been the big challenge in Angola. Very little has happened so far. But at least there is one example of a Norwegian company that tried to do something serious in that sense. Norsk Hydro, one of the biggest Norwegian state-owned or partly state-owned companies, had a tremendous plan some years ago to build the biggest hydropower station in Angola and combine that with the production of aluminium. That was one of the biggest economic diversification plans that we have seen in Angola. It was not possible to implement it, I suppose, because of too much strings attached, too much expectations from the former president to control it, and the danger of corruption. At least that was an attempt, and I think that once again one could look into that. Angola has an extremely rich country when it comes to natural resources. It has tremendous opportunities to use those resources for a more diversified economy. But of course, as Aslak said, the danger and the problem is how to avoid that this ends up in a corrupted system. But there are opportunities, and I hope that really the present economic crisis also and the general drive in the world to green the economy will also oblige Angola to be part of that. And I think there could be areas where Norwegian companies could play a role.
I could just add to that and say that when we first sent our energy advisors to Luanda in the mid-1980s, it was hydrology that they were concerned about, amongst them my father. So We do have some more questions, but we need to wrap up. So I'll just ask everybody to put in a last word, and I'll start again with Herculano. Are you still with us?
From this renewable source of energy point that you raised here, I think is even more needed at this point because of the diversification problem the government put in place, especially when you have to invest away from the urban environments where there are not a power grid, there are not lines of transportation of power, of generating power, and the country is huge. It's eventually the third largest country in Africa, and the opportunities will be everywhere, and there are no infrastructures that can support the level of the development needed in order to uplift the country's economy. So a renewable source of energies are very important right now for the experience I'm facing, because I'm traveling across the country and there is a severe need for power generation sources across the country in order to power the economy. The other thing that I want to mention, because someone brought the issue here, is who is investing in Angola right now? What is the trend? Where the Angolan economy will lean in order to get investors in Angola? I think the experience for the last 2, 3, 5 years has been an increased level of dependence in terms of investments from the Arab world, from Dubai, and from the United Arab Emirates. We have seen a lot of Arab investments in Angola. Recently, we have seen a new big business from Dubai coming in and getting the control and the management of the Luanda-basert port. And that is a major business as Angola rely on imports. That is with a huge potential. We are seeing a lot of Arab businesses coming in within the trade industry. They are doing trade and they are generating a lot of money. They are also getting into the manufacturing sector for machineries, for instance. We have seen Arab businesses moving into the mining industry. So I think the next step, what we might hear in the press, is the level of these investments in the Angolan economy, how these investments can take over the real economy in Angola. I think that there are a lot of opportunities, especially for Norwegian businesses in the country, bringing new technologies, try to help to close the gaps in terms of development and providing solutions that are relevant to the needs of this market in Africa.
Thank you. Aslak, do you have any last comment?
In addition to the obvious fact that Angola needs economic transition or an economic transformation, it really also need to take huge steps in the area of democracy and civil rights, which has been a real weak point under the previous administration. The long 38-year rule of José Eduardo dos Santos, there has, of course, never been real democracy in Angola. And let's hope that the current developments will end up in something more attuned to representing ordinary people's needs and being more responsive to bring about a government that is more responsive to the real needs of the large parts of the populations that really live in terrible conditions at the moment.
I think we can all agree on that. Thank you to all our panelists, especially to Herculano Coroado in Luanda. He's an independent journalist. to Aslak Orre at Michelsens Institutt in Bergen, and to Vegard Bye with me here in Oslo from SCAN team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.